Welcome to another edition of Racquet Society. Today I am joined by the amazing composer, musician, pianist, double bassist, music producer, electronic extraordinaire, Sam Adams, good friend, and of course, as my co-host with the co-most, is that a thing? Sezi Sesker, coming to us from Pennsylvania. And Sam, thank you so much for sharing this playlist. It's so awesome. I've been digging through it, and I love that you sort of sent me on like a wild goose chase through all these different avenues of finding music, like on Bandcamp and Spotify. And I even got to do some like 1998 like really basic HTML programming skills to like build the playlist into the website, which was really exciting. I felt like I was in like a high school like HTML class. And so dude, talk to us about this playlist. There's a lot to say about it, lots of threads that weave through it, which are super amazing. But what is inspiring you like right now about putting this all together?
Well, first I'll say that the real goal of this was to figure out how to merge like Spotify and Bandcamp tracks into one seamless playlist. And I didn't want to do the work myself. And now that I've successfully surreptitiously outsourced it to you, then I feel like,
you're going to love this table I made. You're going to love my HTML table.
Yeah, send the code. I want to see it. Share it. Yeah, about the playlist, I made it very quickly, actually. I got to say, like, I made it, and then I saw Sezi's playlist and Tim's and Masterminds, and I was thinking, oh, God, I hope that mine lives up to theirs, because you guys were so thoughtful in the way that you constructed, like, multiple narrative arcs in some instances. Yeah, I mean, I hope I don't speak too crudely about the music that I included, but basically, having been in quarantine for, I mean, what is it, like month 10 now or something? I've been thinking a lot about playing music. I spend all my time composing and pushing around notes on my computer and on pieces of staff paper. And, to be honest, I just kind of miss the act of playing music. I used to play piano, not so seriously, but for about a 15-year period, I was a super serious, like improvising jazz bass player. And, I played a bunch of like standard jazz repertoire or whatever when I was, in my teens and early 20s. And then when I went to the East Coast and moved to New York, I was doing a lot more kind of a little bit more experimental improvised music and like electroacoustic, whatever. Yeah, and I just feel like I kind of miss like making music in real time right now. Everything's just been so insular, and I've been in my own head for so long that this playlist is kind of just like, a collection of music by people whose gigs I would show up at, hoping that they might like invite me to a session or something, like, artists who I'm really super inspired by and who I'd want to be making music with. I'd say that like maybe one thread that connects a lot of this music has to do with, oh my God, I'm already diving into nerdland, but has to do with kind of like the intersection between technology and like the definition of what like a standard could be in the 21st century. Like when you think of like how a lot of jazz musicians make their mark, obviously it's through like composition and through like the development of different improvisational idiosyncrasies or whatever. But like when you're cutting your teeth as an improviser in that world, like so much of your energy is directed towards like learning how to play changes or blow over like all the things you are. And like, that's how you make your mark. And a lot of the music in this playlist, I think kind of like falls in line with that tradition of like wanting to express your individuality through the lens of these like super old standard tunes. But what's cool about, I think what a lot of musicians are doing right now is that they're thinking less about like improvisation and thinking more about like how they can reshape what a standard is through like production techniques or through the use of like live electronics or some kind of like contemporary digital media or whatever. So yeah, I mean, I'm thinking of like, I mean, specifically just like the most obvious examples of this would be like Koré Smythe, who is the pianist in Ice and plays quite a bit with Hilary Hahn, and is just like a very versatile instrumentalist and composer, super cool musician. That record, Autotrophs, that this one track is from, Handfall of Keys, is basically just like a super old, like late 1920s standard. Actually, I don't know if this particular Fats Waller tune ever made it to like the level of like a standard tune. Like if you went to a session and someone called that tune, I probably would have like kind of freaked out. It wasn't super well known, but the point being that like what he's doing is super simple. You know, I think he just basically had a pedal next to maybe his sostenuto pedal, sustain pedal, that triggered like a super simple bandpass filter. And so when we're listening to this music, like we're hearing, you know, his take on the tune, but we're also listening to this like bizarre interfacing of like a very rudimentary digital technology that like adds a completely new layer to the music. And certainly like for my brain specifically, like it just completely lights up because I'm as excited about what he's doing pianistically as I am with like what's happening with the technology in real time. And then there's the example, I mean, since we're just talking about piano music, there's the Single Petal of a Rose, which is one of my favorite, you know, Ellington tunes. I don't know if you can call it a tune. It's a movement from a suite, the Queen's Suite. And, you know, I think what's super interesting about this is it's like the recording technology and like the super close miking of the, you know, the hammers on the strings and the fingers on the keys and everything. You know, it's like taking like what Nils Frahm and Olafur Arnolds have developed through their, you know, super ASMR style of recording piano. They've taken that and they've applied this technology and this way of listening to an old tune. And it's, to me, it's just really beautiful. It's like, I feel like I'm inside Ellington's piano or something, you know?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, that track is like devastatingly beautiful. I mean, even just the old recording from like the 50s is devastatingly beautiful, but that extra layer of just subtle like electronic manipulation, it's just like floored me, man. I like listened to that track 1,000 times this week, and
I also listened to it repeatedly.
Yeah.
Also to sort of understand what he was doing actually, like what is exactly coming together and creating that sound. So you sort of like spend like 5 times for that, and then you listen 5 more times for how beautiful it is, and you know.
I'm super interested.
Exactly.
In the technology part of this, because it's not obvious how anybody's doing all this stuff on these tracks. Like you just explained some stuff about the Korē Smythe track, which I was like, I don't know what's happening right now. Like, is he improvising with the electronics at the same time that he is, or is that like in post-production? And like, is he able to, like, as an improviser, because obviously as a performer, you have to learn somehow how to communicate things that you can't hear from the stage, that the audience is perceiving that you're doing. And like that idea of having the technology, it's almost like he's perceiving how you're going to experience this in your headphones or something. Because when you put that track on, like the strangeness of distance that comes across and all of the, I guess it's the filtering, not only obviously changes the timbre, but it makes the sound feel like it's like getting closer and farther away from you really quickly. And the same thing in that, is it Bhatia, Rafiq Bhatia, that track?
Rafiq Bhatia, yeah.
It just is so intense and so at times like, I don't want to say cinematic. There's something that just like this intimacy though and distance just that constantly pushes you out of this feeling that you know what's happening. But maybe you know this, maybe you don't, but do they manipulate that all live? Do you know that? Like, are they performing with that?
That's a super good question. I mean, I think specifically with Cory, I wish there was actually more documentation. He has like a super minimalist website where there's like a picture of him and like a 2-sentence bio, and then like, you know, his upcoming schedule, which obviously doesn't have anything right now. So it's like, tell me more, man. I just listening to the rest of that particular record, I kind of want to think that the interfacing of the electronics is a very integral part of the actual improvisation. Like, I can't imagine that he does any of that in post. It's like too erratic and too jumpy and like too nuanced in a way. And if you listen to other, you know, tracks on that particular album, he employs like equally simple processes, electronic processes, to equally complex and satisfying effects. Like there's, I think the first track is called Blockchain. Oh God, is that what it's called? Should probably look this up. Well, whatever.
I didn't check out the record, but I definitely want to now. I mean, all these tracks, I know that I have to dig into the rest of these albums like in their entirety, because there's just so much information that I know is still like that I have to go find.
Yeah, for sure. But I mean, what I was going to say is that the first track is just like a FFT freeze, like sustain, you know, like a digital sustain. And that's it, you know, and he's able to, you know, pull out 10,000 different colors just from this like super, super simple kind of electronic process. And I could be wrong. Like maybe we should call him up and ask him about it. You know, maybe he'd be an interesting person to have on your show. But I can't help but think that like what makes the music sound insane is the insistence on having all the electronic components be like as improvised and as chaotic as like the actual, you know, improvisations themselves, you know, with his hands. Right. And then as far as the Bhatia, Rafiq, which it's not, Rafiq's actually a guitar player. This is his pianist named Chris Padishal. But I have a feeling for this this particular track that it's much more about like the studio recording being the artifact rather than like a documentation of a performance. Like I've definitely been to Rafiq's shows, and that's like not what I've walked away from those shows feeling, that it's like all about like the sensuality and the intricacy of the timbre. It's like, that's not what I've gotten from his performances. So yeah, I feel like in a way there's actually, if I'm reading things correctly and I'm listening to things correctly, that there's actually kind of a major conceptual difference between those two tracks. But then again, I could be wrong, so don't listen to me.
You know, because you mentioned Nils Fram, and I like Nils Fram so much. Chris hears from me about him all the time. I'm totally obsessed. One of the things that sometimes people who actually sort of, nowadays, especially after all these years of kind of like career that he had and such a big following and everything, they're actually criticizing him exactly for this, that sometimes his live shows sound that intimate, that pretty much there's no difference between the record and how he actually plays them live nowadays. That he basically perfected it in such a way now that sometimes it is thrown at him as if almost this makes him kind of like less genuine about the kind of intimacy and the privacy that he is now the master of, you know?
Yeah, that's super fascinating. Yeah, I mean, we usually think about like recordings doing their best to capture performance. But I think now that like the technology is so sophisticated that it's very easy for like performance to capture a recording in a way.
Yeah, sounds like a recording. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Chris, you probably have dealt with this quite a bit as a composer, and this is certainly something I think about, which is like, you know, like one very common way of including electronics in a work is like through the tape method or whatever. I mean, calling it tape is silly because we don't use tape anymore, but like having some kind of like fixed media that you then play along with, and how like, at least for a lot of my pieces, like when I have a fixed media component, like sometimes I'll leave the concert feeling like somehow like unsatisfied, you know, that there's like something about the irreproducibility of live performance that, you know, was lacking and therefore took away from the artistic object itself. I don't know, Chris, like, how do you handle this? Have you experienced this?
Yeah, it's always just like a really dynamic balance between the amount of time you have to actually pull something off, which leads me into a more fixed media space, versus how much time. If you have a lot of time, then opening it up to a lot more live capability. And how many stress dreams that I can like sleep through every night to like deal with the like forgotten cables and missing buttons in my patches and other things that like really stress me out about doing it live. But that's what performing is that stress, and that's where that like magic comes from, is like pulling that off, like getting it all your ducks in a row and making it happen. And this playlist, that's one of the things that I took away, something I got from it like right away, was that sense that you basically brought up right from the get-go, was that you miss performing music. And this is performed music. Everything on this playlist is all about that, the idea that they are making decisions like in that moment, and that these recordings are like a capture of that decision making and like that virtuosity, and a new kind of virtuosity too. I mean, you brought the idea of the technology into it, which is really obviously exciting and contemporary, but just there's moments in these tracks, and I'm thinking of like the Ambrose Akinmusire tracks, where there's like these just super fragile notes, and you have to be so brave to capture that and to go for that. Especially like, let's say you're just like laying down a track and you're 75% of the way through it, it's going great, and then at the very end, I don't remember if it's on the Roy track or Reset.
It's in the other one.
Yeah, on Reset, just this super high pitch, just to end it on the most brave, like high wire act.
Yeah.
To me, that is like the essence of being that. Something that I just really attracts me to an artist is that bravery, like just going for it and being that exposed and being that like making yourself that available it's just unbelievable. But I read that through this whole playlist, like there's an element of performance. It's really about the intimacy of individual people like expressing themselves and improvising, being virtuosic in ways that are sort of common but also very unusual, very non-standard. And it's just very human. And in the midst of like, COVID, it's like really nice to feel like those sounds are like in your headphones and in your living room, and like remembering what it was like to be around people playing music.
Yeah, I know. And it's interesting that you bring up the two tracks by Ambrose. I felt that, as I was building this playlist, that it was like kind of like edging towards like maybe too mechanical and like too kind of angular or electroacoustic or noisy or whatever. And I felt like those two particular tracks from his CD express beautifully exactly what you just said, just like the absolute vulnerability of performance. But beyond that, like what I love about that record is just how beautifully recorded it is, and how you hear like all the extraneous noises that you typically either can't hear or just kind of jettison, as a listener, particularly in like, a lot of like live settings where there's tons of ambient noise or whatever. And yeah, when I listened to that album, which I think in my opinion is his like best work. I mean, he's done some pretty incredible work in the past. Frankly, work that is a lot more collaborative in nature. Like he did something that, like had, an MC and Mivos quartet, and like there's tons of stuff going on. But what I love about this record is that he kind of returns to like something in a way that's very traditional, like a traditional jazz quartet, trumpet, bass, piano, and drums. And using that as a platform to express like pristine vulnerability. Like, and yes, you're totally right. I think it's like a high F sharp or something, which is just like, you're not supposed to be able to play that on a trumpet. And like, to be
Yet
able to
he goes
sustain
for it. Like he really wants to go for it. Yeah.
I know, but what's amazing about it is he goes for it, but then there are also these other kind of like hisses and sighs and kind of, so-called ugly sound. I mean, I think they're all incredibly beautiful because, that's what I want to hear as an artist. Like I want to hear every little creak and, little moan that an acoustic instrument can make. But yeah, I just find that album to be so utterly gorgeous and just very emotionally expansive, and it does so many different things. And I've become a huge fan of Ambrose's music. He actually grew up in the Bay Area. He's like 4 years older than me. So, now we can talk as peers, but like back in the day when I was in high school, 4 years is a long time. So like, I was an incoming freshman and he was a senior, and we were all like, and he's gone on to have this, unbelievable career. He's doing amazing things. And I can't play with him because I'm not a very good bass player anymore. My chops are totally shot, but my wife and I reached out to him like 4 or 5 months ago to see if he'd be down to write a short violin piece for Helen, and he did. And she's been playing it, and just made a video with the dancer and Ambrose's.
Oh, amazing.
We'll put out pretty soon.
We'll try to, whenever you have that out or whatever, like post it, link to it, do something. That's really cool.
Right. Yeah. So that goes back to the idea of creating a playlist filled with music of people who I want to hang out with, but I'm not cool enough to hang out with. It's basically the vibe.
But Sam, tell us also about Steve Lehman, since now you actually put like 3 tracks of his here. And I have to say that I particularly love the first one so much. I sort of like wish that I actually had it on a CD, because we have one of those old cars, Toyota Corollas, where we listen to still CDs. And for some mornings when I really badly need it, I still keep my Beastie Boys CD there. So I would also like to have the Steve Lehman there actually for some mornings where I need to start the day with that. It's that kind of a track that you could start your day with, like, yes, that's this kind of day.
I know. I put it at the top of the playlist, and I was like, oh crap, maybe this is way too intense to like start off. I will say that I was really caffeinated when I made this playlist. And like when I'm usually peaking after like 2.5 cups of coffee, I'll put on that record and just like totally go crazy.
It's really great. I really liked it a lot. There's like, it sort of like reminded me a little bit of the sort of older Jason Moran album where he had this pre-recorded speech that he was sort of like taking the counter off and then improvising off of it, and then melodies were coming out of it. They're sort of doing a little bit of some, of course, much more jagged than that, but nevertheless there are some kind of like contours coming out that they're sort of like then improvising on. It's really nice. I listened to that one repeatedly as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've been a huge fan of Steve's music for a really long time. I mean, as an artist who is equally interested in like electroacoustic composition and improvised music, and like as someone who used to listen to a ton of hip hop as a kid, like when I listen to his music, my entire brain like just kind of goes crazy. I really love it. And this track particular, I just find it, I mean, maybe you guys, since you've listened to it, like maybe you could tell me what's going on, but there's just so much happening. Like there is this guy, Gaston Bandemique, who's Senegalese and is rapping in Wolof, which is a language that I wish I knew so I could understand what he was saying. But like the form has this kind of, it expands, with every third repetition or something, So like not only is it mixed meter, but the form expands by like 5/16 notes and then 7/16 notes. And the rapping over it is just, it's so unbelievably virtuosic and exacting. And I still can't figure out how the hell this is all being put together. Not to mention the fact that there's a really interesting recorded component to this. I could be wrong again, since I couldn't find anything online about exactly how this was recorded, but I'm pretty sure Damien Reed, who's the drummer, like overdubbed himself. And like what he's overdubbing is himself already kind of going crazy. So it's just like so unbelievably textured. But then Steve, who's this, amazing saxophone player and composer, he spent a lot of time studying spectral music, hanging out with like Tristan Murray and all the Columbia people back, 10 years ago or whatever, when he was working on his DMA. So there's like a bizarre spectral component to a lot of his music. So I find it utterly layered, and I really can't get enough of it. And I'm really glad that
Yeah, there's almost
you're
like
into it too.
a messianic quality or something, and that would kind of make sense of the lineage of that kind of, you know,
Expansion.
that of the harmony and stuff in the background is
Yeah.
really interesting, unusual, and the rapping. I mean, there's several tracks on this list, but this one too that reminds me of these Jazzmatazz records from the '90s that Guru put out. I don't know if you know these.
for sure.
I remember
Yeah,
those.
there's-
I love those.
There's this MC Solar track that's really fast, and this kind of reminded me of that. But then I was also, you know, bringing up this thread back about what you're talking about, like what could be a standard. And then, you know, the last track as well, which is like this Jizza track from Liquid Swords, which I like wore out, you know, in like the mid '90s. That was like the like niche, like kind of hip hop record. And strangely, like all of the other band members of Wu-Tang Clan were like so much more popular, like Method Man and Old Dirty Bastard and Raekwon. They all had like huge records, and there was this like Jizza album actually that was like everybody was like, no, this is the one, man. This is the one that's like a concept album with this incredible like film that runs through it, and these tracks, and what could be a standard, you know, and this idea of hearing samples taken from, I think I looked up, it was like the Barkays or something, and Sexton on that album, because they had found, I mean, I think he was sort of one of the early uses of like a sampler, which is like, you know, part of what gave the Wu-Tang Clan like their sound. But this idea of these samples making it into this track, and then this track being like retranscribed by this like jazz combo, and there's almost like hearing the band play this, it's like it's like a transcription of something that was sampled. I mean, there's just something about it that's so, but now it's been recontextualized. They like almost keep the context of it in the arrangement, but I mean, it's super.
It's the end of history, Chris. We're just kind of going around in circles, just like
I can't even talk about it. My brain is like spinning. But also, it's happy hour, guys. It's happy hour.
Yeah.
So.
No, it's like we're taking something and repurposing it, and then repurposing it again, and then maybe again, and like it's like we're playing a game of telephone or something. But instead of like the message being lost, like I feel like the message just gets more interesting each time in a way, you know. Like you're totally right. Yeah, like I looked up the samples too, Barkays and Sexton, since I you know, before you asked me to do this, I hadn't been aware of exactly what RZA had sampled. And yeah, I think what Steve is doing is like, I think that he's trying to, he's doing a number of things, but I think that he's trying to make a statement about kind of turntablism within the lens of like his weird spectral jazz universe, you know, that like, if you actually listen to that Jizza track, it's like super wonky and like super out of tune, you know, I mean, it's totally, like, it's all over the place. And in order for the samples to be fit in like metrically, you know, there has to be just a little bit of stretching and, you know, squashing. And so you get this like bizarre pitch space in a way. And the fact that he transcribes this, you know, for his like weird spectral jazz group, I think just gives it so much life. It's like one of these things where the transcription, despite the fact that it might be like amazing on its own, like gives a new life to the way that you think about the thing that it's transcribing in the first place. You know what I mean? Which I think should be like the point of a transcription. Like it's not like transcription isn't really worth anything unless it's like giving you a prism, you know, through which you can look at the source material.
Absolutely.
So yeah, actually I wanted to share something with you guys because back when I was like 21 or 22, oh no, I was a little older. I was 25. I used to blog. I used to do like dorky music blogging on my website. And I actually wrote about this track and I was like, oh man, I wonder if I could dig that up. And my friend reminded me that there's the Internet Archive, like the Wayback Machine or whatever, that like allows you to go back 10 years on your website or whatever. And I actually wrote about this track in 2011. And can I read this, or should I like do a screen share or something?
No, please take it away. Read it.
Can we do a screen share?
Yeah, let me see here. I think I have to give you permission. All right. You should have permission to screen share. we'll see.
It's
what
pretty
happens
bad writing, actually. Just like to be forewarned. I think I've become a better writer recently. Do you see this?
Yeah.
So this is my website from 2011. I can't believe it's still there. I'm like, pitching all my super hipster Brooklyn shows or whatever. So here we go. So I like spectral jazz. What's it to you? Here's a picture of composer saxophonist Steve Lehman posing with what looks like some bizarre mechanical apparatus protruding from his mouth. Well, it is indeed a mechanical apparatus. Most would consider it not such a strange thing. But Lehman is able to treat it musically, just as he exhibits it here visually, as something that is really not that human. I love his music. I think he's a visionary and is an exception to the rule that omnivorous postmodern American music is trite and bland. I find it particularly compelling that he's able to somehow reconcile the long lost friendships of, for example, GZA, Genius, one of the legendary members of the Wu-Tang Clan, and French composer Tristan Murail, and other seemingly unrelated musicians. I think it's because he pays little attention to style and looks closer at purely acoustical connections. This may seem like a stretch, but what he's showing is that Murail's spectralism and GZA's turntablism are actually looking at the same thing, perhaps from different perspectives. GZA's microtonality is a result of quote unquote rhythmic compensation, meaning that in order to compile a beat that uses one or more samples generally requires changing the speed of the material. So if, for example, GZA is using two samples and one is at 82 and the other is at 89, and they're harmonically the same, there's a typo in there, the result of compensating for the 7 BPM difference is something that's a bit funky and out of tune. Of course, the spectralists approach their microtonality from a much more scientific point of view, but that's not really Steve's point in this work. Like I said, it doesn't really seem to be about intent or craft or style or anything really but sound itself, at least for this particular track. Bold move, Steve. And then
Thumbs up.
Yeah, and then I include the GZA track, and then of course I had to give a shout out to Taishan Sori, who's just like, what can you possibly say about Taishan? But even though this is like pretty terrible writing, I still kind of agree with what I thought like however many 10 years ago, which is that like so much of this transcription is like about like the weird spectral object that is this GZA track, and the transcription is so much more about like just finding a way to distribute the sound amongst his like it's 8 players, it's an octet.
Sure.
So much more about like the weird like spectral pitch play that that occurs when like transmutating this music from one media to another. So thank you for indulging me. You can cut that part out of the talk.
I loved it. How do you kill the screen share? Do you know how to do that?
Oh yeah, here, I'll do it right there.
There it is. That's awesome. No, I think that's totally true though. There's something about a sample and the out of tuneness of it that the ear just completely accepts. I don't know, like I just in the Mastermind playlist, we talked about this Lekeli track, and she has a melody that's basically like A Phrygian, and then these chords come in later in the track, which are like B flat and B natural against this like A Phrygian. And somehow it doesn't bother your ear at all to hear all of that mashed together because it's like sampled material. And I think that there is something about like how like the timbre of those samples or something like overrides our sense of like the harmonic way it fits together or something. Or maybe they just really cleverly select like registers and things like that so that it just seemingly, the dissonance is kind of like mitigated. But I mean, that's super fascinating, that idea of the BPMs and like spectral like ratios and things is fascinating.
Yeah, it's really interesting actually. I didn't think about that, but it's almost like the ear kind of like reserves a special space for the sample, and then it sort of like exits on its own track, and then it doesn't matter if it clashes with the other stuff because you kind of like already know it and etc. Perhaps, I don't know, but yeah, it's true actually what you say, and I didn't think about that before.
I think we should take a little time to talk about Anna Weber, who I had not heard of before you sent this playlist. And those tracks are kind of like a cool, almost like, connection between these two worlds in a way, like sonically from the, like, the Ambrose Akinmusire tracks to the Steve Lehman tracks, there's kind of like this in-betweenness of it or something. But then it also kind of touches on a little bit more of like, you know, the world, contemporary, experimental, almost classical world, even though I think she would not consider herself that. I could be wrong, but I would guess she considers herself a jazz artist. But there's something that you hear the traditions of like Webern, and I mean, I feel like that's present in that music. And yeah, maybe you could tell more about those tracks and how what's interesting to you about them and stuff like that.
Yeah, I met Anna, I think it was like, I don't know, like 2014 or 15 or something. My friend Noah, who's a fantastic bass player, was recording an album in Brooklyn, and she was playing tenor on the album, and I was invited to come and just kind of like be like a cheerleader / consultant and just kind of hang out during the recording session and you know, provide feedback, you know, like where useful. I don't know how useful I actually was during that two-day period. I just really enjoyed getting to like hang out with all these amazing New York musicians. But yeah, Anna was on the record. It's cool getting to know her a little bit. Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. What I love about her music and this record in particular, but you know, obviously certainly these tracks, is that there's a weird threshold for me, at least, where it's not entirely clear like where the composition and the improvisation like split. Like at its extremes, it's very clear. You know, like at the beginning of Array, for example, like to my ears at least, it sounds like very pointillistic and rhythmic and harmony or whatever. And then by the end of the track, like if you were to just needle drop, it feels like raw and improvised and like chaotic and all over the place. But the interesting thing about the experience of listening to the 10 minutes is, to my ears at least, it's not always super clear like when those transitions happen, you know? It's kind of like the experience of listening to like an old like Steve Reich track or something. And it's like, you know, if you needle drop like 5 minutes apart or 10 or 20 or whatever, the music is so radically different. But the thresholds where the material of the music changes, they're a little bit more opaque. And so I think what she's doing is super brilliant. I could be wrong about this, but I'm fairly certain that she hangs out quite a bit with like the Wet Ink people in New York City. Okay. So like Eric Wubbles and Sam Pluta and that whole crowd. And I don't know if this is even a useful thing to say, but I certainly hear that like fusing of kind of more idiomatic improvisation with this like super pointillistic kind of like clustery world of extended techniques, like the kind of approach to instrumental writing that I think falls in line with a lot of like, I mean, obviously Webern, but certainly composers like Ep4, or like Morton Feldman played really, really, really fast or something, you know? Yeah. And yeah, I mean, again, this is music that, you know, as someone who's spent a lot of time kind of straddling the line between the worlds of improvised music and composed music, it's just like, yeah, both sides of my brain light up when I listen to this music. It's also just like the players are amazing on this record. Like, I don't know. I don't know if you guys felt the same way, but just like the energy that she's able to capture, like kind of housing these like little micro improvisations. I find it really alluring. I've become a huge fan of her music.
I really like in the first one, the Korē 2, that there's actually also a oboe player, which is not something that you actually oftentimes hear in a jazz ensemble like that. That sort of like almost reminded me of, I don't know if you know this group called Oregon.
Yeah, you mean like Ralph Towner and
right, Paul McAdams. Exactly.
Yeah,
yes.
Exactly. Yeah, and Gary Peacock, right? Didn't he used to play in Oregon?
No, not Gary Peacock. Gary Moore, not Moore. Moore.
Oh, okay.
Yes, that's the bass player. You mean the bass player?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and they used to have Trilo Curto, but now it's somebody else, etc. Yeah. Yes, I used to love that group very much when I was growing up. So anytime you sort of like incorporate oboe in a kind of like contemporary jazzy kind of like ensemble, it's just like, just like
right.
that.
There's an ECM, European,
The very
minimalist,
very
Oh,
ECM
sure.
kind of sound.
Totally. Yeah. I'm sure like in some like super deep cut record from the 70s, like Keith Jarrett plays oboe somewhere.
Yes.
I mean, I know he plays flute and whatnot, but yeah, I know
Yes,
it's so true.
at the very beginning he did apparently, yes.
Yeah. No, it's so funny how like the timbral worlds of like our little genres or whatever have become so codified, that like when you hear it's just like imagine like Ravel's orchestration pictures, when the sax solo comes in, like the violinist just being like it's like, I imagine it was the same thing. Yeah, no, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
Actually,
and like there's what's that? Go ahead.
This record sounds really good too. Like a lot of the stuff on this sounds really great, but there's a special kind of space on this, and I don't know where they recorded it, but I couldn't honestly tell if the reverb was artificial or not. But it's a really awesome sound, which again puts it into that like ECM quality for me, which is just like exquisite production.
Right.
Like they just spend so much time finding that room and like the setup and the miking and everything, so that things just sound so alluring. Like every one of those tiny little extended techniques or pointillistic things is like exquisitely recorded, and that makes it, I don't know, just incredibly enjoyable to listen to.
Definitely. Yeah, I mean, after making this playlist and thinking about it a little bit, I've enjoyed specifically listening to like all the like jazz standard records that I loved growing up, Miles Davis, Keith Jarrett, since we're talking about ECM, and just like enjoying the experience of like listening to that music purely from like a timbral lens. I mean, it's specifically Keith Jarrett, like those trio recordings from the 80s are so beautiful and so pristine, and like there's no bass in them at all. Like I kind of always knew that, like experientially, just from like getting to know the music, but like I actually like put them through a sonogram last week and was like, there's like literally no bass in any of this, and that's why it floats. Like Gary Peacock, like they basically cut out everything underneath like 60 or something, and Jack DeJohnette, like I think they basically didn't put a mic on, and I could be wrong, but it sounds like there's no mic on his kick drum. It's just it's making me become even more appreciative of how like these micro decisions about how you record and how you handle the kind of timbral skin of a group. Just like really, I mean, it has such a strong like emotional impact on the listener.
And what you say is so true about like the whole of the ECM work. If you look back, actually, that sort of like by making all these decisions that you just referred to, and having such a giant catalog of it, like starting from 70s until now, it almost kind of like, if you're a kind of like good follower of ECM, it almost makes you really go for timbre, like educates you in a way to kind of like to pay more attention to that and to have a kind of like more open mind to that almost.
Yeah, definitely, for sure. Yeah, no, I've always thought of like Manfred as like, a curator in the sense that, he's been very specific about who he selects to be on his record, but I'm realizing that curation has been so much more this like long extended conversation about like how different types of music can be in conversation with one another, specifically through the way that they're recorded, which has been, it's been fun to think about. Especially as like sorry, go ahead.
No, finish your thought, because this is a great tie-in to the Steve Lehman track CRV.
Yeah.
We have to talk about that before we're done.
The end of my thought was just like, now that we're in this like weird period in quarantine where we have to teach ourselves new technologies and what, like I've actually picked up recording. Like I bought some Neumann KM184s and like recorded Helen in the abandoned train station, and have like messed up quite a bit, but have also learned a hell of a lot about like polar patterns and what sounds good and how to use the appropriate amount of compression and everything. And it's definitely given me a new way to listen to music with a kind of heightened awareness of recording quality. And and it brings us to this like bizarre track called CRV.
Best title.
Which I love. Yeah, this is like one of my favorite things that came out of the COVID crisis. You know, there's a lot that I don't know about you guys, but there's a lot that I've seen in the last 10 months that I'm happy to never, ever have to look at again. You know, if I see one more COVID video, I'm going to explode. But Steve did this record, I don't know, like 4, 5, 6 months ago, I guess at the height of the pandemic, where he took his iPhone and he recorded himself in his CRV, like, you know, practicing and coming up with interesting instrumental techniques on a saxophone. And, you know, put it up on Bandcamp, and all the revenue he would gear back towards the freelance community musicians, which is a cool thing to do, you know, just as a gesture. But yeah, I mean, you know, we could talk about Manfred Eicher and like super fancy recording setups and everything, but also, you know, sometimes like all you need is a car, like a Honda Civic and an iPhone and like a Selmer saxophone and a, you know, advanced musical brain, and you can make something pretty stunning. Like, you know, the first time I listened to this record, I purchased it, but I was doing something else. I forget, it may have been like cleaning or something. You know, so I wasn't like doing my due diligence and like, you know, sitting down and listening to it with my eyes closed or whatever. And I hadn't read like the background story of it. You know, I'm a huge Steve Lehman fan. So I was like, oh, he's a new record. Cool. I'm going to put it on. And yeah, I thought it was like a weird Max patch or something, or like, you know, he was playing around with Ableton, or yeah, he's yeah, it's just, it's crazy. Crazy shit, guys. What do you think of it?
I just love this way of like proving that something is live and intimate, and finding ways to do that, like during the lockdown, you know, because basically we all got forced into this position of basically like producing things and working on post-production and like putting stuff out that's sort of been, you know, recorded or manipulated in some way. But this idea of just going super low tech, I think, is like, was like a mic drop or something, to be like, I'm going to use my iPhone. I don't even have the most current model. I got like an iPhone 6 or something. Okay. The microphone's not even that good. And I'm going to sit in my like Honda CRV, which is probably from like, you know, 2003 or something. And I'm going to like play, you know, show you how basically like how intimate and how virtuosic this could be. And I just found that to be like just super poignant, honestly. I was like, that's just actually really special. And if you had told me that idea before I listened to it, I would have thought like, oh, okay, whatever. But then I actually hear it and it's like, oh, actually that is actually really special to hear somebody just like bear themselves that way on their iPhone through like a voice memo or whatever. It's like
exactly, super special. And you're totally right about it being like a mic drop. Like, I don't need, I mean, you just bought some Neumanns. He's like, I mean, the fact that he says it was a 2016 iPhone SE rather than just like an iPhone, you know, it's definitely like just gently letting you know that, you know, that he's a badass.
Oh, that's true.
And I have no idea how those the sound effects are created, like what he's doing. I can't quite kind of like figure out how it's all happening.
Yeah. It's a really interesting record. If you haven't already, I would definitely suggest listening to the rest of the record. It's kind of like at once an exhaustive like overview of saxophone extended techniques, while also being this like very delicate kind of vulnerable personal statement at the same time. I really enjoyed listening to it over and over again over the summer.
Amazing. Well, Sam, this has been awesome. Sezi, Sam, thank you both so much. I can't tell you how great it was to chat with you both about some music. And, you know, Sam, you said you made your playlist really quickly. Actually, everybody we've asked has like immediately sent their playlists. And it's been kind of crazy that people are just sort of dying to talk about music right now. So again, thank you so much.
This was a really interesting one too. I learned a lot of new stuff I didn't know. So thanks for sharing.
Oh my God. I mean, it's my pleasure, you know, like, I have a lot of old friends who I'll see once in a while, you know, people that I grew up with here in the Bay Area. And they absolutely do not understand my musical tastes, so we can't have these like conversations about multiphonics being recorded with an iPhone and like the implications of what that means, like fitting into a lineage of spectral whatever. So the fact that you guys invited me to do this and you know, let me go to town throwing all the weird stuff at you guys, it means a lot. I really enjoyed it, and I can't wait to watch all the other interviews down the line, and I can't wait for my sweatshirt. Send me a sweatshirt, right?
Dude, man, I'm all over the merch, man. I'm all over it.
Merch.
I'm working on possibly fanny packs as well. I'm gonna see if I can get the fanny pack, the sweatshirt. I'm trying to get like the whole like tourist kit, you know, that you can show up to like Rome from America and just immediately fit right in with the locals.
For sure, for sure. Can I ask you like what the like etymology is of the naming of this series? Like why you decided to call it the.
I just love tennis.
Hey, it's enough for me.
And I do too.
Oh, do you play tennis too?
I don't. Chris plays. I'm a pianist. I sort of think that I shouldn't, you know.
I see. Got you.
But there's like but there's another layer, which is that I live in St. Louis, and St. Louis is kind of obsessed with like this idea of like exclusiveness of like social groups that sort of belong in these places. And I just was like, I love the idea of having like this really hoity-toity.
Well, now.
Like, all right, someone's joining me. Racquet Society concept, but for something that's like
PA. Yes.
nice. Something just wide open. That's like, no, actually, this is a space where like anybody can come in and talk about anything, but we're gonna put it under this like exclusive umbrella. I mean, also I want to like promote like events, you know, social events where people can learn about music, put on concerts, do other kinds of stuff, but also just have like cool swag that's kind of inspired by Wimbledon and like weird preppy nerdy clothes.
Yeah, I love it.
Chris designed the logo, which I think looks very nice.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, it looks great. I love the website. No, I love the whole concept. You know, it's like there's such a paucity of like human curation with music in the digital space. I feel like, I mean, I cannot believe that Bandcamp is still awesome. But even Bandcamp, it's like if you listen to the weekly show, it's like, you know, it's going to be like 80% like Afro beat and maybe a little bit. I mean, they do a really good job, but it's like, you know, this is really cool because you're getting completely different types of people with different tastes, just like really just like running the gamut. And I loved your playlist, Izzy. I got
I'm glad.
super caffeinated and was like totally rocking out and was like, man, I need to listen to this music more often. Yeah, it was super great. I really enjoyed it.
That's kind of the premise, is like just asking people what they love right now. Because I want people to talk about what they really like. I don't want them necessarily I don't want to feel like they're educating me. I want to feel like they're like telling me like, this is what you should be listening to because this is awesome. Because then actually like these conversations we've had have been just amazingly positive as well, because it's just kind of like a geek out like love fest. And so much of like the news and our lives are like so complicated right now, and like they're like stressful and anxious, and you know, they're not, maybe some are worse or better or whatever than others, but it's certainly been like a complicated year, and we haven't really been able to just like go to parties and be like, yo man, what have you been listening to? And then just like geek out for 15 minutes about it, you know? And like, I miss that a lot, because that's how my full foundation of a human being as like a professional musician or whatever is based on those conversations. You know?
That's why we did this in the first place, right? You're like hanging out at your CRV 20 years ago, like listening to whatever, you know? No, I completely agree with you, Chris. Like, I mean, and like specifically this, like if you had asked me to make this playlist pre-pandemic, I probably would have been like a lot more obnoxious and like, you know, au courant about it. I mean, maybe that's how it comes off, you know, but I would have been like, I would have made sure that like I had, you know, like
everything covered music and whatever.
Yeah, exactly. But like, I just was like, this is music that I really, really like, and that has like stood the test of time, you know, for me. I mean, granted, it's all relatively new music, but it's music that I continually listen to.
Right.
Short rotation, and like this is kind of how I feel about my writing right now too, which is like, you know, it's unclear whether like the institutions and the organizations that support classical art music and new music, like it's unclear like how healthy they're going to be down the line. So may as well like say what we need to say now, you know, rather than overanalyzing things a little bit. So I really just enjoyed like the positive feeling of putting it together and then chatting with you guys. So
awesome, man. Thank you.
Yeah, way to go. Nice to meet you, Sezi. It was super fun
Very
talking
nice
to you.
to meet you too.